Entering cyberspace matrix.
Cyberspace. A consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators. A graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system.
Hello and welcome to YesterYear's Mac Games, where today we're diving headfirst into the cyberpunk world of Wraith, a brilliant top-down shooter from Terminal Sunset. The game boasts fast-paced and exciting gameplay, graphics that are pretty good considering it'll happily run on 68K processors, and a truly exceptional soundtrack. It's got a pretty fleshed out backstory too, which we can delve into a bit now. The game then takes place in cyberspace. This term was coined by author William Gibson in the 80s. It grew legs and rapidly applied itself to a term for anything online, with meat space often jokingly used for anything that isn't. The concept of cyberspace, and the internet in general, was still fresh and exciting in 1995 when Wraith was released. More and more houses got connected, and people's imaginations ran wild with the ideas of what it could become. Looking into works of fiction from this era is pretty interesting, as unlike today, there was a true enthusiasm and excitement over what sort of form a mature internet would be. Wraith's story plays to this, and manages to cover plenty of cyberpunk cliches in the 4 pages of the manual that it is given. You play as Alex Kendall, a scientist who developed the first viable method for digitizing tactile sensation. Using himself as a guinea pig, he was able to clone his personality and shove it in a computer, essentially backing himself up. Unfortunately for Alex, he was marked for assassination due to his work on prior projects within the Defense Department. One cold Sunday evening, hired guns popped round to his house, and not for tea and biscuits. On the menu that night was cold-blooded murder, and Alex and his family were killed. This irritated Alex significantly, but though his life slipped away from him in the real world, he was born again in cyberspace.
I so like being inside this fancy computer.
It's this digital manifestation that you control, gliding through the internet with vengeance in your eyes. This leads to the game's tagline: revenge is best served on the net. This game falls under the radar far too often. The primary reason for this is it's a Mac exclusive, released at the height of the world's disinterest in the platform in the mid-90s. In addition to this, it's quite picky regarding what it chooses to run on. It doesn't get on with OS 9 at all, which seems to be the most common OS people generally run on their old Mac. So to play this game, you'll need to be using or emulating macOS 7 or 8, with a 68K processor packing at least 33 MHz. All PPC chips work fine too. My captured footage here is running on my Performer 630, which contains a 68LC040 and macOS 7.6.1. It runs pretty well on these. There's a bit of slowdown here and there when there are lots of enemies on the screen, but on the whole, the game lives up to its claims of a fast and clean physics engine. The game is a top-down shooter, which takes place in the digital necropolis. All obsolete, insubordinate, and unusable digital life has been disregarded here, and they're in your way. So, shoot everything that moves, collect keys to get through inhibiting doors, and grab weapon ammo and power-ups on your way to the level exit. The map is room-based. Fly off the side of one to enter the next. This isn't something you really see in modern games, as today's hardware can generally load everything at once, enabling an environment that scrolls with the player. There are a few complications that come from seeing a single room at once. Namely, enemies know you're at the edge of one room, but you won't necessarily know that they're in the next, until they pop out unexpectedly from the side. Interestingly enough, weapons fired off the side of the screen will still damage hostiles if they hit them. This is highly exploitable. Hurling secondary weapons into the abyss hoping that they'll hit something is key to minimizing damage to yourself. Making use of multiple screens, particularly when you're dealing with a swarm of enemies, is an important technique that needs to be learnt. Keep moving and blast away while reversing into the previous screen to minimize the shots enemies can land on you. The problem with these two techniques is that they result in, I'd say, about 40% of the action taking place off screen. I think this is my biggest gripe with Wraith. The second would be some of the level design. Stage 10 in particular, which you can see here, has a deliberately long and windy layout, with one keycard on one side of the map which opens a door on the other side, which has a card for a door back on the first side, and it goes on. I found a shortcut, but it only boosted me half of the distance, and while afterburners do speed you up a bit, it gets a bit tricky to navigate effectively at high speed. It starts to look like a game of pinball. These two issues aside, Shadow Wraith is great fun to play. It gets the core mechanics of a game like this pretty much spot on. Starting with a basic gun, you gradually pick up more powerful and interesting weapons as you progress. Shield, power-ups and health restocks help you out a bit, but really, the game is all about the weapons. The variety between the secondary weapons is great, although I'd usually default to the grenades. Their splash damage affects things through walls, and there's plenty lying about, enabling generous use. The homing missiles are great to watch spiral around. The plasma guns are pretty effective. Proximity mines are pretty rubbish. I think I damaged myself more than any hostiles trying to use them. And the shock cannon is pretty tactical. This one was especially handy in stage 12, as I was trying to preserve shields, as you can pick off hostiles half a screen away, regardless of whatever's in the way. The counterproductively named weapon award goes to the tactical nuclear grenade, which while super powerful, doesn't feel tactical to me in the slightest. It's slow, and I found myself part of the explosion way too often. Weapon sound effects are pretty good, but as far as audio is concerned, the soundtrack is hands down one of the best on the platform. It's all in the .mod format, which while mostly associated with Amigas, wasn't uncommon in classic Mac games. Those familiar with the scene may well recognise one or two of the tracks, such as Stardust by Jester, which is playing now. The game's difficulty can be set by the player, and for good reason. Here's me starting out. Bit of an embarrassment really. The controls do take a bit of getting used to, but once you're comfy with how everything works, you can crank up the difficulty for a greater challenge. The game is mostly about blasting stuff, but there are false walls containing secrets in every level. Some are obvious, and some will be found accidentally, such as this one here, where a hostile managed to fly over one. Puzzle solving is generally limited to a few switch challenges, and the methods for solving them isn't straightforward at all. I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing with this one. But all in all, Shadow Wraith is a great game to sit back and unwind with. You don't need to think too hard to play this, and the action, sounds and visuals keep replayability high. It was well received critically too, and bundled with many magazine cover discs of the era, which is how I came across it. It eventually spawned a sequel, Souls in the System. That one, however, will have to wait for another video. You can find a download to the game file in the usual place, linked to in the video description. I've also plonked in a link to the playlist with the soundtrack, because it's great. That's it for now. If you enjoyed this retro Mac game review, consider giving it a thumbs up. I make new videos periodically, so subscribing to the channel will ensure you never miss a new installment. Making these are a lot of fun, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching. So until next time, thanks ever so much for tuning in.